I recently met an old friend in DC. He's a high-level trade consultant who spends his days navigating these labyrinthine entity lists and export control regimes.
I'm one of those guys.
Exactly. And he sat across from me in this dimly lit steakhouse, surrounded by stacks of legal briefs and highlighted memos, and he just looked remarkably smug.
I can picture it.
To him, these papers, the infamous whitelist, they were the ultimate weapon. He literally tapped a thick folder and told me, with this sort of academic glee, this is how we control the future. If your name isn't in this book, you don't exist in the digital age.
Wow.
He truly believed that a few hundred pages of carefully worded text could just freeze the progress of a global superpower. He was talking about de-risking and licensing hurdles with the kind of reverence most people reserve for, holy texts.
The world is a giant courtroom.
That's it, exactly. To his mind, the most powerful person was the one with the most sophisticated legal filing. But as I'm watching him organize his color-coded tabs, I kept thinking about a drone shot I'd seen earlier that morning. It was this gargantuan, sprawling construction site in the East Asian heartland. Thousands of engineers were syncing a new gigawatt-scale power grid to a fortress of AI data centers.
A very different picture.
The contrast was just jarring.
Yeah.
On one side, you have this entropy of legalism, an ever-growing mountain of paperwork designed to create friction and just say no.
And on the other,
The raw, humming reality of physical computing power designed to say go. My friend was so busy polishing a technology iron curtain made of paper that he didn't seem to notice the world on the other side was just building a faster engine. And that moment left me with a chilling realization. We are witnessing a definitive inflection point where a legal text just can't arrest the velocity of electrons anymore. The whitelist isn't a strategy, it's a defensive spasm.
Right.
We've entered a new era where the contest isn't over who has the best lawyers, but who has the most silicon and the most power to fuel it. We're moving from an age of paper rules to an age of physical sovereignty, and I think most people are still just staring at the scrap paper.
That story really, it perfectly captures the profound shift we're going to get into today.
It feels like the entire battle for global influence is moving. It's moving out of those purely abstract realms, the paper rules, the financial leverage, and it's landing firmly in the physical domains. We're talking silicon, energy, and integrated industrial capacity.
And what's truly fascinating here is that we're being forced to fundamentally redefine what constitutes national strength. The material we've synthesized points toward a definitive inflection point, a strategic pivot away from the systems that defined the post-war world.
Right.
And the new hierarchy, the hierarchy of modern civilizations in the age of artificial intelligence, well, it's now being determined by physical semiconductor manufacturing capacity.
Okay, so let's unpack this monumental transition. Our mission in this deep dive is to explore this new reality. And we're going to focus on 3 interconnected arguments that really map out this shift toward material power.
That's good.
First, we'll dive into the strategic shift from financial dominance to computing power sovereignty.
The new gold, basically.
Exactly. Second, we're going to analyze the competitive advantage that technocratic execution has over, legalistic obstruction. Building versus blocking.
A crucial distinction.
And finally, we will explore the resurgence of industrial realism and energy security in this new fragmented digital world.
It's an essential discussion. This transition from abstract financial controls to tangible material power bases is reshaping geopolitics at a speed that's, frankly, outpacing our ability to understand it. We need to get a handle on the material bases of power if we really want to understand what's coming.
All right, let's start with why the old system is breaking down. We're calling this the obsolescence of the 1945 order. So why are the rules that were established after World War II suddenly losing their teeth?
Well, the thing is, the post-1945 system, it wasn't successful because of, clever diplomacy or some abstract ideals. It was successful because it was anchored in something very real. America's undeniable techno-industrial supremacy and its institutional dominance. After the war, you have to remember, the U.S. was basically the only major industrial power with an intact, fully operational manufacturing base.
The workshop of the world at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that physical productive engine was the silent guarantor of the whole system. Financial control, the dollarized system from Bretton Woods, that was the lever. But industrial capacity was the fulcrum. It was the hard reality that backed up the paper rules.
And as we know, that industrial base, the sinews that underpin those past victories, the assembly lines, the steelworks, that's been steadily hollowed out over the past few decades.
Precisely. As manufacturing capacity migrated offshore, in this big push for globalization and cost efficiency, the industrial base just weakened. It created this huge, expansive global supply chain, which was great for prices, but it effectively outsourced the very foundations of geopolitical influence.
So U.S. hegemony now rests on, what, much less stable ground?
Much less. It's a strategic landscape that's now shaped as much by physical production happening in East Asia as by its own domestic hard power or its financial dexterity. The fulcrum has moved.
This means the traditional ways we measure industrial capacity, the old Cold War metrics like tons of steel produced or barrels of oil.
Obsolete.
They've been superseded by a completely new metric for national strength.
Absolutely. The new measure of strength is the seamless integration of compute power and large-scale AI systems right into the entire national industrial ecosystem.
So we're moving beyond just simple automation.
No, way beyond. This is about using AI to optimize every single facet of production of logistics, research, resource allocation, and doing it at a national scale. It represents a profound increase in capability.
So this isn't just one sector of the economy. It basically defines the whole system.
It does. This is what we're calling the techno-industrial base. It's the fusion of physical infrastructure, manufacturing muscle, high-capacity energy systems, resilient supply chains, and knowledge networks, all into a single, cohesive, high-velocity engine of national capability.
Okay, so in this new age, power is measured by...
It's measured equally by chip foundries established, reliable grid nodes fortified, and megawatts generated. Industrial policy isn't some optional accessory to your grand strategy anymore. It is its core foundation.
I see the logic, but isn't that maybe overstating the role of industrial policy a bit? I mean, we've had advanced economies focused on services and IP for decades now. Why the sudden return to actually building things?
Because the nature of the technological competition has fundamentally changed. The Cold War, when you get right down to it, was a contest between two industrial systems, even if it was framed ideologically. Today, the contest is still about how nations build, integrate, and scale the material bases of power. If you can't physically produce the high-performance AI accelerators or the advanced robotics or the energy storage systems, then you are reliant on a foreign power. And reliance is vulnerability. The ability to deploy AI at scale is entirely dependent on your physical capacity to manufacture the hardware.
And the undisputed lifeblood of this entire digital transformation is the advanced semiconductor.
Indeed. Advanced semiconductors they're truly indispensable. They power everything from large language models and autonomous systems to critical defense platforms.
Everything.
Everything. So disruptions or restrictions in their supply translate immediately into bottlenecks for AI research, development, deployment. It stalls progress across the board. This is why nations now universally view domestic chip manufacturing capabilities and secured access to high-performance AI accelerators, like the ones from NVIDIA, as absolutely critical national security assets.
This intense focus has led directly to a kind of geopolitical fracture, what we're calling the new Silicon Curtain.
Yeah, the new Silicon Curtain is the clearest physical manifestation of these escalating U.S.-China tensions. It's fragmented what was once a seamless global supply chain.
And export controls are the main tool.
Right. Export controls on advanced AI chips and the crucial manufacturing equipment to make them. They're not just trade rules anymore. They are powerful geopolitical levers. They're used to constrain adversarial capabilities and maintain a strategic dominance in AI compute. They're designed specifically to exploit that physical bottleneck of advanced manufacturing.
So we're seeing a global scramble where nations are prioritizing resilience and strategic control over just pure efficiency.
It's a necessary defense mechanism. And these restrictions have, in turn, accelerated technological self-reliance drives in the nations that are targeted.
Yeah.
You see firms investing heavily in indigenous chip design, in lithography R&D, and in production capabilities just to reduce that foreign dependency. And beyond that, this intense focus also drives a global imperative for data sovereignty. Cross-border data flows are facing more and more restrictions. Now, this might impede collaborative global innovation, but it fundamentally enhances a nation's autonomy and security over its crucial data assets. It prevents them from being mined or controlled by external powers.
And the inherent nature of compute is really the core of this whole geopolitical struggle. It is fundamentally physical.
100%. Compute requires an entire physical ecosystem. You need the advanced chips, you need a massive, stable energy supply, sophisticated cooling systems, and physically secure data centers. Control over these physical foundations is the new arena of geopolitical competition.
And the economic scale is just immense.
It's staggering. The immense market value concentrated in these platforms just underscores this reality. I mean, the market cap of the key U.S. tech and semiconductor giants, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, and NVIDIA collectively, that exceeded $10 trillion as of early 2024.
And that value?
That market value is anchored in defensible physical infrastructure and the highly concentrated intellectual property required to build it.
And this physical concentration also defines global vulnerabilities. The material highlights the acute risk presented by the extreme concentration of advanced chip manufacturing in Taiwan.
That concentration is the basis for the whole concept of the silicon shield. Taiwan's indispensable role in producing the world's most cutting-edge chips acts as a powerful geopolitical deterrent.
Because any disruption wouldn't just hurt one economy.
It would have catastrophic global consequences across defense, finance, logistics, you name it. This elevates the discussion from mere trade to existential security. The strategic importance of data centers, for instance, which were once considered just, benign real estate, is now front and center in global security concerns. Access to the latest processors for AI development can be choked off by export controls and physical limitations. Hardware accessibility and national control over production are now the critical factors, often overriding purely algorithmic advancements.
So the bottom line from this section is pretty clear. The ability to build, own, and secure the physical layer of the AI stack. That's the new measure of national power.
Exactly.
Okay, moving to our second big argument, this competition of systems. If compute is the new currency, then the capacity to actually build and execute determines who wins the race. The systems that prioritize building have a distinct advantage over those characterized by legalistic obstructionism, like that entropy of legalism I mentioned at the start.
Yeah, and that entropy really stems from what's described as the twin legacy of the 20th century in some systems. You have the overly centralized bureaucracy of technocracy on one hand, combined with the counterculture's influence on the other, which resulted in an obstructionist vetocracy.
Technocracy and vetocracy, that sounds like a recipe for institutional paralysis.
It is. Technocracy tries to manage everything centrally, which leads to massive complexity, while vetocracy empowers numerous groups, often through litigation, to just say no to almost any major project.
A perfect storm for stagnation.
It causes profound societal sclerosis. It leads to deceleration in productivity and a general inability to build or operate anything at speed, especially the massive infrastructure projects that you need for the age of compute. The friction is so intense that problems that are, technologically solvable are socially and legally prevented.
And this is starkly visible in what the material calls the permitting problem. Let's dive into the housing example, because that's something so relatable for everyone.
Right. Building affordable housing is, technologically speaking, a solved problem. We know how to do it. Yet local land use regulations, often incredibly complex zoning and review processes designed for maximum local control, artificially restrict supply.
Creating artificial scarcity.
Exactly. And the result is that home prices have risen over 4 times since 1990, far, far outpacing income growth. The median single-family home price is now 5 times the median household income, when 3 times is generally what's considered affordable.
In this regulatory environment, it's not just about cost.
No, it effectively slows down innovation in construction, it hurts productivity by restricting talent mobility, and it undermines social stability, all because of legal friction.
And this friction extends directly into the energy grid that we need to power this exponential age. This is where that local obstruction becomes a global strategic vulnerability.
That's the critical link back to Section 1. The hyperscale data centers needed for AI required just astronomical amounts of stable power. Yet, as of late 2024, there was almost 1.6 terawatts of proposed electrical generation capacity, and that includes critically needed clean energy like solar and wind, just waiting in interconnection queues to connect to the existing grid.
Just waiting.
Just waiting. And we're talking about projects totaling a terawatt of storage capacity waiting right alongside it.
5 years of delay, on average, for projects that are ready to go. The potential industrial capacity just sitting dormant is staggering.
And it's primarily due to permitting timelines and legal challenges. This delay directly impacts our ability to build the industrial base that's necessary for compute sovereignty. If you can't power the fabs and the data centers, you simply can't compete in the AI race.
And the root cause is often identified as these procedural laws, like the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, which has become a tool for obstruction.
NEPA is the prime example of the regulatory ratchet in action. It's a procedural law that requires an environmental impact statement, or EIS. The mechanism of the ratchet is this. Activist groups use litigation to challenge an EIS, arguing it failed to address some incredibly complex details, say a specific aspect of water quality or a rare species impact.
Okay.
When a court rules in their favor, that precedent raises the legal standard for all future EIS filings, regardless of whether the new project is in a sensitive area or not.
So just to be clear, if a lawsuit over one transmission line forces the review of, say, migratory bird patterns, every single transmission line built after that, everywhere in the country, has to incorporate months, if not years, of expensive granular migratory bird studies.
That is exactly the ratchet. The standard is constantly raised by litigation and court precedent, but it is rarely, if ever, lowered. An average EIS now takes nearly 5 years to complete and runs hundreds of pages, often supplemented by over 1,000 pages of appendices.
A labyrinth of paperwork.
And it delays critical infrastructure, including transmission lines, renewable energy projects, and even the semiconductor manufacturing plants required for national security. This weaponization of procedural law just forces a systemic slowdown on technologically feasible solutions.
And this inherent conservatism seems deeply rooted in the incentive structure of the regulatory agencies themselves.
It is a systemic issue. Look, regulators are primarily blamed for negative outcomes, a failure, a risk that materializes, a disaster. They're almost never credited or rewarded for enabling efficiency or growth or speed.
That's a great point.
If they streamline a process and nothing goes wrong, the public doesn't notice. But if they streamline a process and something does go wrong, their career is over.
So that creates this powerful incentive bias toward extreme stringency and conservatism.
It does. It causes regulations to ratchet upwards until they become cripplingly burdensome. You even see this in fields like drug development. The cost to bring a new drug to market takes about 12 years and often over $1 billion. This phenomenon, known as Eroom's law, is the perfect inverse of technological acceleration.
Moore's law spelled backwards.
Exactly. Technology moves faster, but regulatory hurdles increase the time and cost exponentially, all driven by overly cautious regulation and delay, just to avoid that single, rare, catastrophic failure that could generate political backlash.
Okay, so in stark contrast to that, we look at the other side of the strategic coin. Nations prioritizing industrial maximalism and system building.
Competitor nations have fully internalized the logic that production is power. They've adopted a strategy built on deliberate, massive state investment and long-horizon industrial planning. This has led to a doctrine of techno-industrial maximalism. Their system is designed for execution, not obstruction.
And this strategy has successfully transformed countries into the infrastructural core of the global economy, projecting power through construction and production.
This systemic building is, it's evident in their dominance across key areas. Solar panels, electric vehicles, lithium batteries, telecommunications, industrial AI platforms. This is not accidental. It is a deliberate restructuring of global value chains. By focusing on building, scaling, and controlling the industrial stack, they gain leverage that paper rules alone just cannot touch.
Let's turn to the intellectual side of this problem, this notion that regulation is inherently antithetical to innovation. We're calling it the false choice between regulation and innovation. The sources we looked at suggest this widely held belief is actually flawed, particularly when you look at the European context.
Right. The common industry view, especially in tech, suggests stringent regulation inevitably compromises innovation. They cite the U.S.'s historical success with a more permissive, laissez-faire approach. Proponents will argue that Europe's stringent, rights-driven, regulatory model like GDPR is the reason it lacks homegrown tech giants.
But the analysis here argues that the European innovation gap can actually be traced to more foundational structural issues that have nothing to do with the stringency of their digital rules.
Exactly. We need to look at the structural economics. The EU's difficulty in cultivating tech giants is attributed primarily to 4 foundational factors that are, completely unrelated to digital regulatory stringency.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is market fragmentation. The EU is incredibly heterogeneous. You're dealing with 24 official languages and wildly diverse cultural demands. This creates massive barriers to scaling innovations. A streaming service or an e-commerce platform that can achieve rapid high-scale adoption across the unified U.S. market has to localize, translate, and culturally adapt across dozens of EU member states. That significantly limits its ability to achieve the sheer size necessary for tech dominance.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second factor is the structure of their financial system.
Yeah, you see deeply underdeveloped capital markets. Europe lags significantly in equity finance. While a company might be able to secure seed funding, they struggle immensely in the later stage funding rounds, those crucial D&E rounds, because they just lack massive institutional capital.
So unlike the U.S.
Right. U.S. markets are driven by institutional investors like university endowments and pension funds that are willing to tolerate high risk for potentially massive returns. That provides a far deeper pool of venture capital than the more conservative European banking system.
So the U.S. financial ecosystem is just better optimized for these high-risk, high-reward tech bets.
It's genius in this specific context. Third, there's a cultural and legal issue of risk aversion and punitive bankruptcy. Punitive insolvency laws in many EU states impose very high costs on failure. They can leave entrepreneurs financially ruined for years. This fundamentally discourages the necessary risk-taking required for ambitious tech ventures. It slows down that whole cycle of failure and reinvention that innovation really thrives on. Culturally, there's just far less tolerance for business failure than in the U.S.
And what's the final factor?
Finally, it's talent acquisition and retention. Europe really struggles to attract and keep the highly skilled immigrant talent that is a major catalyst for innovation. The U.S., with its top-tier universities and vibrant ecosystems like Silicon Valley, often serves as a magnet, and that leads to a significant brain drain away from Europe.
So this analysis suggests that regulation is kind of a side issue compared to these core structural problems. The sources even suggest that centralized EU regulations, like the GDPR or the AI Act, can actually be beneficial in some ways.
That's the critical twist. Centralized EU regulations, by providing a common set of rules, can actually mitigate the enormous complexity of having to deal with 27 disparate national rulebooks. The lack of regulatory consistency is a major impediment for businesses.
So a single strict rule is better than 27 different, less strict rules.
For a company trying to scale, absolutely. By providing a common standard, the EU reduces uncertainty and complexity, which can actually facilitate innovation. And beyond that, stringent regulation can spur what are called innovation offsets.
Explain that concept. How does a strict rule spur innovation?
It forces a higher standard. Stringent regulation, like the GDPR, has driven a shift in marketplace expectations. It's compelled firms to innovate new privacy-enhancing technologies. The market then rewards the firms that figure out sophisticated ways to deliver services while respecting these stringent privacy requirements.
So the rules actually force technological breakthroughs.
Right, in encryption and decentralized processing or synthetic data things that might not have occurred under a more laissez-faire approach.
We return now to the material foundations of power, what we're calling industrial realism, and the pursuit of resilience. We established in Section 1 that the U.S. has this profound strategic vulnerability because of its hollowed-out foundation.
Yeah, the financialization that severed the link between American geopolitical primacy and its material foundations, that's really the root of the problem. The country can invent the next generation of technologies, but it can't reliably produce them at scale. It's become heavily reliant on outsourced fabrication.
The example of NVIDIA and AMD chips comes to mind.
It's the perfect example. They're architected in California, but they're fabricated overseas. This strategy essentially exchanged production scale for intellectual property dominance, and in doing so, it inadvertently outsourced the security of its own industrial capacity.
And this reliance is strategically crippling when geopolitical friction heats up.
It is. Reliance is a strategic vulnerability that became just undeniable during recent trade standoffs. You saw rapid exemptions being issued during tariff disputes, not because of some diplomatic breakthrough, but because critical sectors of the U.S. economy literally could not fully operate without materials and production capacity located elsewhere. The economy just wasn't war-proofed or supply chain resilient.
This environment has demanded a fundamental shift to industrial realism, recognizing that material security is paramount.
And this strategic realism is immediately reflected in the resilience response of targeted nations who are now seeking self-reliance. Faced with export controls on high-end chips and manufacturing equipment, their industry has been galvanized toward self-reliance. Major firms are investing significantly in indigenous chip design and production capabilities, all aiming to reduce foreign dependency and establish a resilient domestic technological stack.
And this self-reliance drive, it extends beyond just high-end chips into raw material constraints, right?
Exactly. The strategic importance of critical minerals cannot be overstated. We've seen strategic responses that included the hoarding of critical materials, like gallium and germanium, which are essential for advanced semiconductors and optics. By controlling the supply of these materials, countries can directly create material constraints on the global supply chain. It demonstrates that control over the materials that underpin production is a fundamental aspect of supply chain resilience.
So if the problem is a hollowed-out foundation, the solution has to be a concerted effort to rebuild. The sources call for a new grand strategy, building to lead, focused on a second great build-out.
To succeed in a multipolar digital world, the challenge is no longer about preserving some inherited dominance, but about reconstructing manufacturing advantage. This requires a wholesale return to system building, a deliberate, massive national effort to reestablish a fully integrated techno-industrial ecosystem.
And compute must be at the center.
It has to be treated as a strategic national asset, not just another commodity.
So this means integrating innovation with a restored industrial base and thinking about defense and industry in a unified, mobilized way.
The strategy demands these audacious public-private alliances that are focused on winning the decisive domains of the future. Semiconductor fabrication, high-capacity AI systems, robotics, and critical minerals processing. The goal is to build, scale, protect, and then embed these technologies into the global economic and security order.
To achieve this kind of strategy in a world that's so fragmented, the architecture of global power itself needs to be reimagined. It requires new models for alliances, moving beyond just shared ideology toward what you're calling techno-industrial ententes.
Right. The 21st century order has to transition from a reliance on purely ideological blocks to an age of techno-industrial alignment. Partnerships should be forged through shared infrastructures and co-production agreements. The proposed techno-industrial entente is basically a strategic coalition that's designed for joint industrial mobilization and co-production of the core infrastructure of sovereignty, computing, energy, and physical AI.
And crucially, these partnerships would operate under a rigorous, dual-track Hamiltonian model. What exactly does that model require of the partners?
That dual-track model is designed to ensure maximum domestic resilience for the host nation. To gain access to the technology and the security guarantees of the alliance, partners must first commit to financing, building, and scaling critical production capacity inside the host nation's industrial heartland.
So, build here first.
Build here first. Only then are they permitted to develop parallel facilities in their own territories. This prioritizes strengthening domestic IP and defense-critical industries before anything else.
That seems like a challenging proposition for allies. Isn't there a risk that this kind of strategy simply forces the adversaries to accelerate their own self-reliance drives even faster?
Well, that's the perpetual tension in any strategic policy, right? Imposing constraints will accelerate self-reliance in targeted nations. We saw that clearly earlier in this section. However, the dual-track entente isn't about stopping others from building.
It's about building faster.
It's about ensuring that the leading industrial power and its allies build faster and maintain an insurmountable advantage in complexity and scale. It's a race, and the Entente is designed to ensure the aligned powers start with the most robust, secure, and integrated industrial foundation.
And what are the primary focus areas for this kind of strategic co-production within the Entente?
They are the material foundations of this exponential age. So first, semiconductors and compute infrastructure, joint foundry capacity, lithography systems, advanced chip packaging. Second, AI and physical AI, co-development of AI training clusters, edge inference networks, and military-grade physical AI for logistics and manufacturing.
And the third?
And third, and maybe most critical, energy and critical minerals. Rare earth processing, lithium refining, and high-density grid infrastructure to fuel the entire industrial and compute demand.
The core lesson here seems to be that in this new age, the line between civilian and military infrastructure is entirely blurred.
Absolutely. Fabs, fiber, energy, AI, robotics, they are all dual use. The defining metric is who can deploy, defend, and integrate these capabilities at scale. This requires a strategic imagination that thinks not just about the velocity of electrons, but also about shaping the very architecture within which all future contests are going to occur.
This has been a fascinating exploration of how technological advancement and material capacity are fundamentally reshaping our geopolitical reality. We've seen the foundation of the post-war financial order just erode, and it's being replaced by a strategic imperative that's centered on the physical means of production.
We've established that the shift from financial hegemony to compute sovereignty is fundamental. The hierarchy of power is now being determined by who can most efficiently overcome bureaucratic resistance and execute massive industrial projects, enabling this idea of techno-industrial maximalism.
And the realization that one nation's profound innovation capacity is threatened by its inability to reliably produce that innovation at home, often due to legalistic obstruction, it necessitates a wholesale return to system building and industrial realism. The capacity to build the physical foundations of AI, the silicon, the energy, the manufacturing scale, that is the defining metric of power in this new age of physical sovereignty.
The ultimate measure of strength in the 21st century is no longer who writes the most sophisticated rules, but who possesses the industrial imagination and the political will to construct the systems that will define the future global operating system. The next grand strategy will not be written in declarations, it will be engineered.